Hello, Gospel Fellowship, and everyone else able to join us for our study of the Psalms. Today, we get to look at a psalm that is very beloved to many of us. It's one that sometimes I've heard read at funerals or various times of kind of hardship and uncertainty. It was actually one that, as a church, we looked at very early on in the pandemic, given some of the situation that it recognizes as well as the comfort that it brings. And it's the psalm that provides the some of the scriptural origin to a hymn that we sometimes sing, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," one originally written in German by Martin Luther, the reformer. So it's a marvelous psalm. We don't often read the entire psalm. Usually we sort of pick and choose words that seem most appropriate for the circumstance. But today we are going to read the entire thing. It's not too long, but it is helpful in my mind to consider the full context of the confidence and security that's commended to us as we find our refuge in the Lord, our fortress. That in no way does this psalm take the edge off of a very real and otherwise troubling circumstance, not only in general, but also in terms of hostility that is felt and even the effect that the Lord's power has upon the nations. And we're left with nothing less than a very sobering view of God. One of the verses that you'll recognize is a portion where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." But listen for the context and how it describes it. It is, again, a very sobering picture of God's power, even while there is a quiet and confident and secure trust in the Lord of hosts, the Lord Almighty, who is the refuge of his people. Let's read this psalm together. Psalm 46, if I didn't say it already. Psalm 46 is the one we're looking at together. Let's read this now. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. You'll notice that there is a verse that is repeated in this psalm. It's verse 7 and also verse 11. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Now, I think that's a helpful cue in sort of understanding the overall structure of this psalm. It begins with verses 1, from verse 1, concluded then in that verse in verse 7, where it presents the kind of circumstance that we are in, how it is that we are, the Lord would have us respond, or that we're able to respond by his grace, the reason why we respond that way, and then there's a contrast with the nations in general. Having looked at that, then it moves to verses 8 through 11 on what is the purpose of all of these sorts of things that are going around. What is it that we are supposed to discern what is it, in fact, that we actually observe when we look out on the world and we look out on what is it that has befallen the nations and peoples around us. So verses 1 through 7 give kind of the circumstance we're dealing with some of the features of what that looks like, and then we get a much broader perspective in verses 9 through 11 in asking what is it that we are to consider along those lines. So looking at this first section to begin with, there's an expression that God is our refuge and strength. He's our help in trouble. And that becomes the reason why we have no cause to fear. And this is really the kind of principle, the idea that this psalm hinges on, that the reason why we have confidence and security and that there is indeed no cause to fear is really derived from the Lord himself and what he is towards us or for us. He's our refuge and our strength. And the way in which this comes to full relief in the psalm is in what is a vivid sort of contrast with what is going on, at least potentially, around us, and the circumstances in which the Lord continues to be a refuge, and the circumstances in which we continue to not be filled with fear and not being afraid. Now, listen to this again. This is, if we understand who the Lord is and what he is for us, this is the circumstance in which we will not fear. Listen to this. We will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Now, it's hard to envision any of the ways that the psalmist speaks here. It's hard to envision sort of experiencing any of these things and not have the trembling around us lead to a trembling within my own soul and in response. I mean, maybe you know what it's like to suddenly have something that you're standing on break or give way. This is describing the earth itself giving way. It's like suddenly what you just presume is able to hold you and carry you and sustain you is just sort of the bottom is torn out from underneath it. It just gives way and is collapsing around you. And even then, this imagery of the mountains and the sea, it's almost like these two things that are so far separated. I mean, how do we describe oftentimes how high a mountain is? We talk about how far above sea level it is, right? I mean, these are things that are separated spatially, so that even when the waters themselves of the world are spread out naturally across the earth, that there are portions of the surface of the earth that still rise above them. But this is a kind of almost reversal of things, where you can think of it almost as a kind of reversal of the sequence of events in Genesis 1, where you had water and then sort of these what is the earth itself emerging out of the water, or perhaps even the waters being removed and the earth remaining, and here is a kind of undoing of all of those things, that this boundary that the Lord has made and the seas being withheld, and what is this land being sustained and dried and able to sustain life and be the place of the dwelling place of mankind and other creatures that he's made, and the place of provision from which it comes. All of these things sort of crashing back together, being overwhelmed and submerged into the heart of the sea, and the waters sort of filled with almost this kind of rage, such that the mountains themselves tremble before them. I mean, think about it. What could cause a mountain to tremble? Well, the swelling of the waves of the water into the heart of which that they will soon be thrown down. I mean, this is a fearful kind of a sense of what's crashing in around us in every place. I mean, where could you possibly go if this is what's happening? If the ocean itself turns against all inhabited and inhabitable space on the earth, where could you go? Flee to the mountains? It's the mountains themselves that are thrown into the heart of the ocean. What is possibly left? What could bring forth the kind of life that sustains life upon the earth? I mean, there's no provision. Everything that's been planted and that we would depend upon and wait for, anything that is raised in terms of cattle, I mean, is done away with. It's there is no space left to live. There's no provision that is ordinarily given. But still in that circumstance, what does the psalm say? We will not fear. Even though all of this happens, there is still no cause for fear. Not technically because of what is going on around us, but because whatever it is that may go on around us, still this is true, that God is our refuge and strength. The stability of creation, get this, has never been your refuge. The integrity of the world around us, the fact that the ground upon which we stand does not just spontaneously give way beneath our feet, that we have a home that is sheltered by the swelling of the waves. None of those things have been where we found our refuge and strength in the first place. Remember the God who made those things. He is our refuge and our strength, so that even when these things are taken away and when the very provision of the Lord and the place that he's given for us to inhabit is itself turned against us as though it were hostile against us, still we have no cause to fear because our confidence and our trust is in the Lord. He is our refuge and our strength. And precisely in that time of trouble, the kind of refuge and the kind of strength he is suddenly put on perfect display. This is what he is a refuge for. Our rest is in him. But still, okay, let's get practical here. I can trust the Lord, but doesn't it mean the end of my life? If the earth gives way beneath my feet and the last remaining place of refuge for the swelling waves is itself thrown into the heart of the ocean, and the place that seems to be most secure and steadfast and awesome and powerful in the earth is filled with fear at the swelling of the waves, doesn't that mean the destruction of all of my life and everything I have? Well, this is where the psalmist goes on. Because there is cause, there is not a cold kind of bitter call to trust in the Lord, but there is a good and gentle provision that comes from the Lord in the midst of all of those other things, so that it's not an abstract idea. It's not just a figment of our imagination or kind of mind over matter that says, don't be afraid, everything's going to be just fine, this is the best of all possible worlds, or anything like that. No. It's saying, though all of these things give way, there is actually something that you have that perfectly sustains you. Listen to this. Verse 4. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. Here is a source of blessing and of life and provision. If you sort of imagine what it is for a city that has these secure walls built up around it, and imagine it's not quite the kind of scenario that's pictured here. But if you've ever kind of seen perhaps in a movie or read or kind of considered what it is for like a city and fortress to be under siege, where you've got a foreign army that is coming up against it and ready to invade, and the gates have to be blocked off to keep them out, and everyone stays walled up within this city, and therefore what you have to provide and to sustain you all simply depends on what it is that can be kept and actually grown from within the walls. And one of the things that you need then is a source of water, right? It's life. And here is, if there is a stream that in some ways is able to pass through this city, you have a provision, and it's basically everything that you need given and provided to you in terms of an ability for irrigation and of course the provision of water and things along those lines. But there's something almost like that here, in that in this city, in this place, even while everything else would cave in around you, so that the creation itself falls back in upon itself, and almost there's this spontaneous cataclysmic kind of decreation going on around you. Still, the city of God has something. It has a river, and its streams make glad the city. There's a refreshment that comes. There's a joy and gladness and a blessing and a sense that there is all that is possibly needed and given. First thing I want you to notice, what makes this city what it is that this is the habitation of the Lord. That's remarkable. Oftentimes, the great city is spoken of as we ought to consider it as the place in which the people of God dwell. It is an inhabited city. It was the city of David. It's the place in which the people come and find refuge. But what makes the city what it is, what actually sets it apart, is holy for the people, and actually a benefit for the people, is that this is the place, the habitation of the Most High, the city of God that we're dealing with. Now, this is the place where He is, where He remains, and in this city, there is a river whose streams make glad its inhabitants and the city itself, as it is provided for and a place of refuge. Well, what is that river? And then I want to turn to a couple of the passages. Well, I think the river is God Himself. Listen to this. Let me read verses 4 and 5. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. And then verse 5 goes right on from there. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. That the river is very closely associated with the presence of the Lord Himself. What is the river that we have? Well, we're still distinguished from God, but still very closely associated with Him, in that the river from which the streams come that make the people glad and the habitation glad and joyful in a place that is sustained and nourished and strengthened proceeds from the Lord Himself, who is in her midst. Let me read a couple other verses where similar kinds of language is used. Psalm 36, verse 9. I'll actually start in verse 7. How precious is your steadfast love, O God! The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house. Notice the habitation is alluded to here. And you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light do we see light. So this is a river that's spoken of in terms of that which gives life and is suited to provide life for its inhabitants. But whose river is it? Well, with whom is this river? Well, with the Lord Himself. It is inseparable from God and His presence, and that which flows from Him unto His people. Revelation speaks similarly about this, though hearkening back to, again, what is the original holy habitation of God and what is made to be the holy habitation for His people, the Garden of Eden, where in Genesis 2 it describes even a river, or a few rivers actually coming together in that area, something that was so the same kinds of ideas signified even from the beginning in terms of the provision for God's people. But Revelation 22 says this, 22 verse 1, then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Notice that its source comes from the throne of God. Now that's not ordinarily how a river flows. It's not simply that there is some other source and then it emerges out from under, but that it flows from the throne. So that the origin is God himself as he is seated enthroned from the throne of God and of the Lamb, enthroned in this place. It flows from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the city, the street of the city, also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. See the kind of life and provision that is sustained by the river of life. The river of life brings forth the tree of life, the leaves of which we're told here are for the healing of the nations. This is the kind of provision that the people of God, that which flows from the Lord, and is that which proceeds from him, and is the blessings of life that he gives to his people. That's what is in this city. The reason why the people of God, the reason why we, even when everything else falls in around us, and the very environment and provision, the place out of which the Lord ordinarily provides for us, when it is removed, still we have a place in which the Lord provides, and he provides abundantly. For where he dwells, a river flows, making glad the city. But there's a contrast. Not everyone enjoys that same kind of provision and sustenance from the river that flows from the throne of God and the city, the holy habitation of the Lord. So we see a kind of contrast then in verses 6 and 7, and I think it's helpful to see this in the context of what is the falling apart of the world around us, or at least the fact that it could fall apart. Let me read this and make some comment. Verse 6, the nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Now, when you deal with the fact that there is a scarcity of resources, people get into all of the discussions of economics and things along those lines in terms of how, in terms of the buying power that people have, how it is that you hold on to resources and how it is that they are distributed. What do you do about the fact that there's only so much to go around? What do you do, especially in a context where things, where provision that you need or provision that you thought you had is suddenly taken away? It kind of produces a society that is suddenly in all sorts of upheaval. If you're in a place where it seems like things are falling apart and you do not have provision coming from the ground and from this world in the ways that you need, suddenly everyone is very agitated around them. The nations rage and the kingdoms totter. Things fall apart, and there's all sorts of wars that would take place in order to either get what you need, or to sort of store up what you might possibly need in the future, or at least store up what you know is not in infinite supply. This is how the nations respond to living in a place that is able to give way beneath our feet. Certainly you see kind of the contrast, and clearly the contrast that takes place between those who are sustained by the river of life in spite of the very earth giving way, versus those whose only hope and sustenance comes from a world that is able to give way, and one day will. There is a kind of raging and tottering, ready to fall over, and trembling that takes place. But notice, even as the psalmist moves on to profess that the Lord of hosts is with us and the God of Jacob is our fortress, notice there's already a hint in terms of the shift that's beginning to take place. Where does all of this uneasiness come from in terms of the uneasiness and kind of instability, it seems, of creation itself, and the uneasiness that translates into how it is that the nations respond? Well, it actually comes from the Lord. Listen to this in verse 6. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He, that is God, he utters his voice, the earth melts. Now, this is maybe a little bit startling, but we start to see that what is in itself perhaps cause to fear, or at least cause for the expectation that we would be filled with fear, is actually cause for greater confidence, because what you see is not simply the lack of any stability. What you are seeing around you as things fall apart, and there's the uneasiness of the response to the world around us, or the fact that the things that we have fall apart and do not last. What you're seeing is not simply a lack of power, but actually the presence of power, and that is the Lord himself, who brings and reduces these things to nothing. You're seeing the display of the power of the one who is your refuge. That the refuge and confidence and strength that anyone would have is not going to be found in themselves. It's not going to be found in the things that are provided to them, but is going to be found in the one who has both given them and the one whose power it is to take them away. But he is the refuge of his people, and he is the Lord Almighty, the Lord of hosts, who is with us and with his people. So that moves us then to this last part of the psalm, where the psalmist encourages us, where we are seeing that part of what we are supposed to do is to actually consider and to observe what it is that takes place around us. For this is opportunity not to be filled with fear, but to be filled with a reverent sort of contemplation of who our God is as the one who is our refuge. Let me read these verses again. Verse 8, come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Part of the purpose. Now, when we see things fall apart around us, and a pandemic is kind of an obvious example, any kind of other economic stability or perhaps political or national instability, things along those lines, where what our life it would seem depends on, and what is ordinarily stable is beginning to fall apart and not only disintegrate, but to actually be almost enraged in a kind of self-defeating conflict, and all of these things. We're actually supposed to observe all of that and to discern and see what are the works of the Lord. What makes things fall apart? Well, the Lord brings desolations on the earth. That's worth noting. It's a hard truth, but it's something that the psalm would have us consider. It's the Lord that reduces the works of his hands to nothing. Just as it is his work to bring all things into being, it is his work to bring such things to a close. He has brought desolations on the earth. But notice what he does. There's kind of an interesting way of approaching things in verse 9, that on one hand, there is the bringing in of peace, but it is peace by way of an exertion of power. Verse 9, and it's something that's reserved only for the Lord to do this kind of thing. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Here is the Lord who brings not destruction for destruction's sake, but comes as an almighty warrior, bringing destruction that there might be an eternal peace that comes. You see how both the justice and judgment of the Lord come together in terms of the peace that he provides and that he establishes by his mighty power and almighty working. That is what we are to consider and to behold as what is the work of the Lord, so that that the end result is a call to this, to be still and know that I am God, and considering him as he is exalted above all the nations and above exalted in the earth. There is a display of his glory, both against the nations in comparison to the things of the earth, but ultimately, as this psalm holds out, for the sake of his people, and that the Lord exalts himself and glorifies himself unto us, knowing him and considering who this God is, who is indeed with us and who is indeed our fortress, so that if there is any trembling that we would have, it is not a trembling before the earth giving way. That doesn't cause us fear, but a trembling, or rather a being still before the Lord. It's actually an interesting contrast between being still and trembling. We don't tremble. The earth trembles. It doesn't cause us to tremble or to fear, but rather to be still. But it's to be still, not merely as in a sort of casual, flippant sense, but to be still in a kind of holy reverence and consideration of the God who is far greater than all of these things that we thought we needed so dearly. But the Lord himself, the Lord of hosts, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress, and so we have no cause for fear. He himself is the river of provision for his people. Let's pray. God, I thank you for this psalm. I do pray that in all things we might be filled with a great confidence as we look to you, as we consider the provision that comes from you, a place of provision that Christ himself has secured entrance to. That by your grace, we who should merely be recipients of the display of your power against us and our sin are those who are given to see the display of that power as a way of displaying the great power and glory of the one who is our refuge. Thank you for your salvation and the gift of grace of causing us to have a place in the holy city, the place of your habitation. We do pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. Good to be with you all.